Hi guys, welcome back to story time. We are going to be reading the first part of chapter 4 today, and it is called At Flourish and Blots. So just a quick reminder, chapter 3 ends with Ron showing Harry around his room, and Ron is feeling a little bit nervous and a little bit embarrassed because his room is really small, but actually Harry says this is the best house I've ever been with, and Ron just feels really happy about that. And yes, so we're going to read the first part of chapter 4 today, and it goes like this. Life at the Barrow was as different as possible from life in Privet Drive. The Dursleys liked everything neat and ordered, and the Weasleys' house burst with the strange and unexpected. Harry got a shock the first time he looked in the mirror over the kitchen mantelpiece, and it shouted, "Tuck your shirt in, Scruffy." The ghoul in the attic howled and dropped pipes whenever he felt things were getting too quiet, and small explosions from Fred and George's bedroom were considered perfectly normal. What Harry found most unusual about life at Ron's, however, wasn't the talking mirror or the clanking ghoul. It was the fact that everybody there seemed to like him. Mrs. Weasley fussed over the state of his socks and tried to force him to eat 4 helpings at every meal. Mr. Weasley liked Harry to sit next to him at the dinner table so that he could bombard him with questions about life with Muggles, asking him to explain how things like plugs and the postal service worked. "Fascinating," he would say as Harry talked him through using a telephone. "Ingenious, really. How many ways Muggles have found of getting along without magic." Harry heard from Hogwarts one sunny morning about a week after he had arrived at the Burrow. He and Ron went down to breakfast and to find Mr. and Mrs. Weasley and Ginny already sitting at the kitchen table. The moment she saw Harry, Ginny accidentally knocked her porridge bowl to the floor and with a loud clatter. Ginny seemed very prone to knocking things over whenever Harry entered a room. She dived under the table to retrieve the bowl and emerged with her face glowing like the setting sun. Pretending he hadn't noticed this, Harry sat down and took the toast Mrs. Weasley offered him. "Letters from school," said Mr. Weasley, passing Harry and Ron identical envelopes of yellowish parchment addressed in green ink. "Dumbledore already knows you're here, Harry. Doesn't miss a trick, that man. You've got 2 of them," he added, as Fred and George ambled in, still in their pyjamas. For a few minutes there was silence as they all read their letters. Harry's told him to catch the Hogwarts Express as usual from King's Cross Station on September the 1st. There was also a list of new books he'd need for the coming year. Second-year students will require the Standard Book of Spells Grade 2 by Miranda Goshawk, Break with a Banshee by Gilderoy Lockhart, Gadding with Ghouls by Gilderoy Lockhart, Holidays with Hags by Gilderoy Lockhart, Travels with Trolls by Gilderoy Lockhart, Voyages with Vampires by Gilderoy Lockhart, Wanderings with Werewolves by Gilderoy Lockhart, Year with the Yeti by Gilderoy Lockhart. Fred, who had finished his own list, peered over at Harry's. "You've been told to get all Lockhart's books too," he said. "The new Defense Against the Dark Arts teacher must be a fan. Bet it's a witch." At this point, Fred caught his mother's eyes and quickly busied himself with the marmalade. "That lot won't come cheap," said George with a quick look at his parents. "Lockhart's books are really expensive." "Well, we'll manage," said Mrs. Weasley, but she looked worried. "I expect we'll be able to pick up a lot of Ginny's things second-hand." "Oh, are you starting at Hogwarts this year?" Harry asked Ginny. She nodded, blushing to the roots of her flaming hair, and put her elbow in the butter dish. Fortunately, no one saw this except Harry, because just then Ron's elder brother Percy walked in. He was already dressed, his Hogwarts prefect badge pinned to his knitted tank top. "Morning all," said Percy briskly. "Lovely day." He sat down in the only remaining chair, but leapt up against almost but leapt up again almost immediately, pulling from underneath him a molten grey feather duster. At least that was what Harry thought it was, until he saw that it was breathing. "Errol," said Ron, taking the limp owl from Percy and extracting a letter from under its wing. "Finally, he's got Hermione's one. I wrote to her saying we were going to try and rescue you from the Dursleys." He carried Errol to a perch just inside the back door and tried to stand him on it, but Errol flopped straight off again, so Ron laid him on the draining board instead, muttering, "Pathetic." Then he ripped open Hermione's letter and read it out loud. "Dear Ron and Harry, if you're there, I hope everything went all right and that Harry's okay and that you didn't do anything illegal to get him out, Ron, because that would get Harry into trouble too. I've been really worried, and if Harry is all right, will you please let him know at once? But perhaps it would be better if you used a different owl, because I think another delivery might finish your one off. I'm very busy with schoolwork, of course." "How can she be?" said Ron in horror. "We're on holiday and we're going to London next Wednesday to buy my new books. Why don't we meet in Diagon Alley? Let me know what's happening as soon as you can. Love, from Hermione." "Well, that fits in nicely. We can go and get all our things then too," said Mrs. Weasley, starting to clear the table. What are you all doing? What are you up to today?" Harry, Ron, Fred and George were planning to go up the hill to a small paddock the Weasleys owned. It was surrounded by trees that blocked it from view of the village below, meaning that they could practice Quidditch there as long as they didn't fly too high. They couldn't use real Quidditch balls, which would have been hard to explain if they had escaped and flown away over the village. Instead, they threw apples for each other to catch. They took it in turns to ride Harry's Nimbus 2000, which was easily the best broom. Ron's old shooting star was often outstripped by passing butterflies. 5 minutes later, they were marching up the hill, broomsticks over their shoulders. They had asked Percy if he wanted to join them, but he said he was busy. Harry had only seen Percy at mealtime so far. He stayed shut in his room the rest of the time. "Wish I knew what he was up to," said Fred, frowning. "He's not himself. His exam results came the day before you did, 12 OWLs, and he hardly gloated at all." "Ordinary wizarding levels," George explained, seeing Harry's puzzled look. "Bill got 12 too. If we're not careful, we'll have another head boy in the family. I don't think I could stand the shame." Bill was the oldest Weasley brother. He and the next brother, Charlie, had already left Hogwarts. Harry had never met either of them, but knew that Charlie was in Romania studying dragons and Bill in Egypt working for the Wizards' Bank, Gringotts. "Don't know how Mum and Dad are going to afford all of our school stuff this year," said George after a while. 5 sets of Lockhart books, and Ginny needs robes and a wand and everything." Harry said nothing. He felt a bit awkward. Stored in an underground vault at Gringotts in London was a small fortune that his parents had left him. Of course, it was only in the wizarding world that he had money. You couldn't use galleons, sickles and nuts in muggle shops. He had never mentioned his Gringotts bank account to the Dursleys. He didn't think their horror of anything connected with money, with magic, would stretch to a large pile of gold. Mrs. Weasley woke them all early the following Wednesday. After a quick 6 bacon sandwiches each, they pulled on their coats and Mr. Weasley took a flower pot off the kitchen mantelpiece and peered inside. "We're running low, Arthur," she sighed. "We'll have to buy some more today." "Ah, well, guests first. After you, Harry dear." And she offered him the flower pot. Harry stared at them, all watching him. What am I supposed to do?" he stammered. "He's never travelled by Floo powder," said Ron suddenly. "Sorry, Harry, I forgot." "Never?" said Mr. Weasley. "But how did you get to Diagon Alley to buy your school things last year?" "I went on the underground." "Really?" said Mr. Weasley eagerly. Were there escapeators? How exactly "Not now, Arthur," said Mrs. Weasley. "Flue powder's a lot thicker, dear, but goodness me, if you've never used it before." "He'll be all right, Mum," said Fred. "Harry, watch us first." He took a pinch of glittering powder out of the flower pot, stepped up to the fire, and threw the powder into the flames. With a roar, the fire turned emerald green and rose higher than Fred, who stepped right into it, shouted, "Diagon Alley!" and vanished. "You must speak clearly, dear," Mrs. Weasley told Harry as George dipped his hand into the flower pot, "and mind you don't get out at the right gate. "The right what?" said Harry nervously, as the fire roared and whipped George out of sight too. "Well, there are an awful lot of wizard fires to choose from, you know, but as long as you've spoken clearly—" "He'll be fine, Molly, don't fuss," said Mr. Weasley, helping himself to Flue powder too. "But dear, if he got lost, how would we ever explain to his aunt and uncle?" "They wouldn't mind," Harry reassured her. "Dudley would think it was a brilliant joke if I got lost up a chimney. Don't worry about that." "Well, all right, you go after Arthur," said Mrs. Weasley. "Now, when you get into the fire, say where you're going, and keep your elbows tucked in," Ron advised. "And your eyes shut," said Mrs. Weasley. "The soot—" "Don't fidget," said Ron, "or you might well fall out of the wrong fireplace. But don't panic and get out too early. Wait until you see Fred and George." Trying hard to bear all of this in mind, Harry took a pinch of Flue powder and walked to the edge of the fire. He took a deep breath, scattered the powder into the flames, and stepped forward. The fire felt like a warm breeze. He opened his mouth and immediately swallowed a lot of hot ash. "Diagon Alley," he coughed. It felt as though he was being sucked down a giant plug hole. He seemed to be spinning very fast. The roaring in his ears were deafening. He tried to keep his eyes open, but the whirl of green flames made him feel sick. Something hard knocked his elbow and he tucked it in tightly, still spinning and spinning. Now it felt as though cold hands were slapping his face. Squinting through his glasses, he saw a blurred stream of fireplaces and snatched glimpses of the rooms beyond. His bacon sandwiches were churning inside him. He closed his eyes again, wishing it would stop, and then he fell face forward onto the cold stone and felt his glasses shatter. Now we're going to stop there. We've been reading for quite a long time. This is, I think, about half or a third way into the chapter. He's gone through the fireplace. He's wanting to go to Diagon Alley to buy his school things, but something mysterious is evidently going to happen. So stay tuned. Part 2 will be coming very, very, very shortly. Please remember you have a copy of your chapter so that you can read alongside me. I know it can be quite difficult to just focus when you're listening to someone for a long time. I hope you have a lovely day, and I hope you are enjoying Harry Potter so far. Bye guys.